Okay, some news here out of Fulton County, Georgia, where a special grand jury was convened as part of District Attorney Fani Willis's investigation into Trump and his allies' effort to overturn the 2020 election. Now, that special grand jury heard from about 75 different witnesses and has finally completed its report. Most of that report won't yet be released, but 3 sections of the report have been released today, and even with that limited information, there are still 2 hugely important takeaways here, so you'll definitely want to hear both. First, that the panel, quote, heard extensive testimony on the subject of alleged election fraud from poll workers, investigators, technical experts, and the state of Georgia employees and officials, as well as from persons who still claim such fraud took place. We find by a unanimous vote that no widespread fraud took place. That no widespread fraud took place. Here's why that's such a bombshell revelation here. Trump's request that Brad Raffensperger find 11,780 votes was predicated on the notion that there was fraud, and that because there was fraud, he apparently had to take extraordinary measures to rectify what he viewed as a flawed process. But because we now know from the special grand jury that, in fact, there was, quote, no widespread fraud, now Trump's defense is gone. Again, the whole point for Trump was that he had to do this to overcome the widespread fraud. Except without any predicate, all we're left with is that Trump just committed a crime, which bodes really, really poorly for his defense. And on the issue of boding poorly for Trump, we also know from DA Willis herself that a decision on whether or not to hand down indictments is, quote, imminent. And while we don't have a timeline more specific than that, one could pretty much glean from imminent that it implies we can expect to hear more in days or weeks or maybe a month or so. Again, that's a guess, but clearly these officials choose their words carefully, and she wouldn't have used the word imminent if that isn't what she meant. And here's the other major piece of what we now know thanks to this report. The special grand jury found that there were witnesses who lied while under oath and that they were recommending indictments for those people. Quote, a majority of the grand jury believes that perjury may have been committed by one or more witnesses testifying before it. The grand jury recommends that the district attorney seek appropriate indictments for such crimes where the evidence is compelling. And while we don't know who those witnesses were who lied, we do know that many of the witnesses were aligned with Trump, meaning it's certainly possible that in their effort to help Trump cover up a crime, they then implicated themselves in another crime. And if that's the case, it certainly wouldn't be the first time that Trump officials hitched their wagons to his, only to go down in the end. And that list, by the way, includes Alan Weisselberg, Rick Gates, Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, George Papadopoulos, Roger Stone, Michael Flynn, George Nader, Elliot Broidy, and Steve Bannon. I mean, honestly, the only thing more pathetic than all of these people getting indicted on Trump's behalf is that there are people out there who still haven't gotten the memo. Now, why is this part especially important? Maybe those people will get slapped with a perjury charge and get indicted, but that happens all the time, so it's not exactly earth-shattering. Here's why. Because since we know that the jury has recommended indictment for those who lied under oath, now District Attorney Willis will have extra leverage over the people who lied to that grand jury to charge them, to flip them, and to develop them into cooperating witnesses. In other words, I know it's frustrating for us that we didn't get to see the entire report released, including the names of those witnesses who are believed to have lied, but the fact that their identities are still hidden actually presents a benefit to prosecutors, because now Willis will still have at her disposal the tactical advantages that she needs to get some of those witnesses to help her up the food chain. And at this point, those witnesses will know that their options are either impending indictment or to cooperate and try to mitigate some of the pressure off of themselves. And while these people are certainly known to grovel at Trump's feet, I would imagine that given the chance to save themselves, they'll choose that option 9 times out of 10. And look, I know that there are those of you watching this video who are tired of the constant updates and don't feel like anything is actually happening, and I hear that. Trust me, I know I couldn't get out of a parking ticket with a fraction of the success that Donald Trump seems to have gotten away with trying to overturn a presidential election. I spoke with former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirkner as part of our new legal series, The Legal Breakdown, on YouTube, about exactly that point, and here's what he had to say. Now, Glenn, people are going to watch this video and they're going to say, look, we're always one step away from Trump being indicted, and it never happens. I mean, we've been through years of that. What would you say to those people based on this update right now to kind of restore their faith in this process?
You know, Brian, I'd say a couple of things. Today, we are one day closer to Donald Trump being indicted. Of course, that would be true every day if Donald Trump is ultimately going to be indicted. But, you know, these are concrete developments that we see. You know, once Fani Willis completed her grand jury investigation, she presented 75 reluctant witnesses, and the grand jury has issued a report that I can all but guarantee says, here are the Georgia state crimes that were committed based on the evidence that was presented to us, And here are the people who should be indicted for those crimes. That is a concrete step and a concrete development. And the other thing that it's just kind of an overarching observation. Nobody has ever criminally indicted a former president of the United States. But, just because it hasn't happened yet does not mean it won't happen. I believe the people in the Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor's office, the New York District Attorney's office, goodness knows the Department of Justice. I believe they know what the stakes are. And I believe that they're going to get there in their own time. Now, one of my persistent complaints is they haven't gotten there quickly enough. They haven't met the moment of the danger to our democracy presented by a guy like Donald Trump. But I do believe they're going to get there, and they're going to get there in their own time when they believe they've done everything they can to maximize their chance of a conviction at trial, because that is the ultimate end game.
To that point, you and I have touched on this before, but we're talking about a crime where Trump is on tape asking Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find enough votes for the express purpose of anointing him the winner of an election that he lost, votes that didn't exist, imaginary votes. I mean, as clear a crime as you could possibly find. Is there any defense for Trump here? Is there any reason why DA Willis would choose not to indict if and when we find out that the jury has recommended indictment?
There is zero defense that Donald Trump has. There is zero reason, as best I can tell, that Fani Willis would have to decline to indict Donald Trump. Brian, when I had the good fortune of trying cases, including RICO cases, in which I had wiretap evidence, I called it a press play trial. I pressed play on the old, cassette recording machine, tells you how old I am. And you would hear the defendant, who was sitting across the courtroom from the jury, committing the crime on tape, on a recording. That's what we have from Donald Trump's just find me 11,780 votes and corruptly declare me the winner. And he threatened Brad Raffensperger that in substance, you could be prosecuted if you don't do that. I mean, talk about a gross abuse of power on top of the Georgia state election crimes Donald Trump was committing. There is zero chance he won't be indicted in my book. There is zero chance, almost zero chance, he won't be convicted. I think the biggest question is, upon conviction, does Donald Trump land in prison, or do they give him some sort of a pass by putting him on home detention?
All of which is to say, I know that this process is long. I know that this process is rife with delay. I know that this process is unsatisfying, but remember two things. First, that all of this is unprecedented. It is not easy to indict a former president of the United States, even if he's given them a lot to work with. And second, things are moving in the right direction, however slowly and belabored this process is. We would not be watching the special grand juries be convened in Fulton County. We would not be watching the special counsel subpoena Trump's lawyers and Mike Pence. We would not be watching judges uphold contempt fines for Trump in New York if they weren't leading to something. So while I can't promise anything will happen at the end of the day, at least know that if something were to happen, this is the process that'll get us there. Before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can click the thumbnail right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work even further, the best way is to subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. There you can check out my interviews with major players in the world of politics, including President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Katie Porter, Jamie Raskin, and so many more. Plus other interviews that live exclusively on the podcast. That link is also right here on this screen, or just search No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen wherever you listen to podcasts.